Hi guys, welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 12 favorite books that I read in 2019. This is one of a series of end-of-year videos with different lists. I am going to have some videos where I'm talking just specifically about books that were published in 2019, but for this video, these are my overall favorites of the books that I read this year, regardless of when they were published. And instead of putting these in ranked order, I'm going to be talking about them based on their category. First up, I have 4 books that are sci-fi or fantasy targeted at an adult audience that made my list of 12. The first one, and if I was gonna pick a favorite book of 2019, this would probably be it. This is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I have a complete standalone review video of this book, which I can link up above if you guys haven't seen it and want to check it out. I absolutely adored this book. I know it's not for everybody because it is a slower paced book and a more complex book. It is more literary fantasy, but I loved everything about it. In many ways, it is a love letter to storytelling in all of its forms. I won't say too much more here. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, definitely go check out that video, but I would say that this is my favorite 2019 release. The next book in this category is one that came out last year, and that is The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is a queer fantasy retelling of King Lear, and it is absolutely beautiful. The writing is very lyrical. It's another one that is very slow-paced, very character-driven with a lot of rich thematic content. You're probably going to see this as a theme in many of my favorites on this list, but I was so happy that I finally got around to reading this. In fact, I loved it so much that I had this girl who runs an Etsy shop do a sprayed edges version for me. And it's got 3 different symbols representing the 3 sisters in the book, which I really love. I love having this edition. It's really special. Next up is a book that has been very polarizing this year. This is one that I think people sort of love or hate, and it's another one that has its own review. This is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This has kind of been pitched as lesbian necromancers in space, which is accurate, but I think doesn't necessarily do a great job of telling you what it's about. I loved Gideon as a character. I thought she was very snarky. She made me laugh. This has some body horror in it. It also has a closed circle murder mystery element to it. Again, it's one that people kind of love or hate. I really loved it, very much got along with it, and I can't wait to see what happens in book 2. So I have the beautiful first edition with black sprayed edges. Love this, and if you haven't seen it, it even has the beautiful skull on the front. So it's a beautiful book, and one that I really loved. The final book in the adult science fiction and fantasy category for this year is one that actually surprised me. I picked this one up in December and was completely blown away by it and adored it. This is Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is actually a debut fantasy novel, which I am really impressed by, and it is inspired by Mughal era India. I just love it. This is another much more character-driven fantasy story, and it follows a young woman who is of mixed birth. Her father is part of the ruling race and is a governor on behalf of the emperor, and her mother was his Amrithi mistress. The Amrithi are these nomadic tribes people who are outcasts and are slowly being kind of killed off, and she is trying to hold on to her Amrithi roots even though her mother is no longer with her. The interesting thing about the Amrithi is they are descended from the Daiva, which are these sort of magical beings, and so she has magic in her blood, which ends up attracting the attention of the spiritual leader of the empire, the Maha, who basically forces her into this marriage so that he can control her magic. So it's this really intricately woven story. It also explores other types of female strength, which I really enjoy. This heroine is a strong woman, but not in the like kick-ass type of way, more in the sort of strategic, quiet sort of way, and it's really great. This also features one of my favorite romantic relationships in a book that I've read this year, a super slow burn friends to lovers romance that's so beautiful, really well done. and really deeply based in friendship and partnership, which I am a fan of. So yeah, I really, really loved Empire of Sand. Definitely recommend it. Moving on, I have 2 books in this list that I'm calling historical fiction, although one of them has more sort of fantasy mythological elements to it, and one of them is more of a literary historical book, but that's the category I'm putting them in for the purposes of this video. The first one is another one that I was kind of late to the game on, and I think I have a standalone review for this as well. This is Circe by Madeline Miller. This was a big favorite in BookTube last year, and early in 2019 I finally got around to reading it and absolutely fell in love. I think part of this for me is that I really deeply connected with Circe, especially her experience of entering motherhood and her desire for more in her life. There was just a lot I really deeply connected with. This book means a lot to me. And again, like many of my favorites, it's another novel that is very deeply character driven. It is slower paced. This, along with several of the others I've talked about, if you need a fast paced plot with a lot of action in your books, some of my favorites might not work out so well for you, especially Circe, but I just loved it. I loved the writing. I loved the character development. Yeah, this book just meant a lot to me. It was definitely a favorite of the year. The other book in this category is a work of translated fiction that I heard about originally from Matthew Sharapa. This is one of his favorite books, and I picked it up and totally fell in love with it. This is The Court Dancer by Kyung Sook-Shin. This was originally written in Korean. It is historical fiction following a young woman who was an orphan and grew up to be a dancer in the Korean court back during the Belle Epoque era. Then a French diplomat falls in love with her and takes her back to France, and things happen. I don't want to spoil things, but I just thought the writing in this book was so lyrical and so beautiful. The character development was so well done, and the thematic explorations in here were just so rich in terms of things like identity and gender and racism and yeah, just a lot of things. I thought this was a really, really beautiful book, and I loved it a whole lot. So this one is also making my favorites list, and this one came out translated in English in 2018. The next category here is romance. I had one book that made my best of the year list in romance, but don't worry, there will definitely be more romance content coming your way. I am gonna have an entire video talking about all of my favorite romance novels that I read this year, but one of them made my overall 12 best of the year, and that is actually a debut novel that I thoroughly enjoyed. This is Well Met by Jenn Deluca. You may have seen this around. I really, really enjoyed it. It was so cute and so much fun. It is an adult contemporary romance that takes place during a Ren fair. I just thought this was so sweet and so swoony and fun, and I love the Ren fair element of it. So this was definitely my favorite adult romance that I read this year, and I had to put it on this list. The next category is nonfiction, and I have 2 books in this category, both from the same author. The first one is Stamped from the Beginning: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. I absolutely love this. I read this on the recommendation of Mara from Books Like Whoa, and originally listened to it on audiobook and loved it so much I really wanted to own a copy for myself. This was a National Book Award winner, which I think it is well deserved. It is for sure a tome, so if you're doing it the first time, I might recommend doing an audiobook. Honestly though, at some point I would love to go back and reread this and tab it up, because it's just so well researched and interesting and informative, and it traces the history of racism and racist ideas from basically earliest known recorded history all the way up through the Obama presidency in America, and it is fascinating. Well worth picking up. This one came out in 2016, and then this year the author sort of released a follow-up to this book, which is also making my favorites list. This is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. It is much shorter. This is part memoir, part essay collection, and I love this, especially as a follow-up to the original book, because it sort of approaches it as, okay, given all of this, then what? What do you do? What do you change? How do you be an anti-racist in all of these different sort of areas of the world and things that are going on? I think it's really rich. It's well worth picking up. It's easy to read. So yeah, I love, love, love both of those. I will definitely read whatever else he puts out in the future. I just think he's a really fabulous nonfiction author, and both of those made my best of the year list. And the final category of books on my favorites of the year list is YA speculative fiction. I have 3 books that made this list, and they are all speculative in some way. One I would call a sort of horror mystery, one is a fantasy romance, and one of them is sci-fi with some fantastical elements to it. The first one is another quite polarizing book. This is another one that people tend to either love or hate, and I really loved it. This is The 10th Girl by Sarah Faring. It is a debut gothic horror mystery set in 1970s Argentina at a girls' boarding school in Patagonia. It is very dark. There are lots of content warnings in it, and there is a big twist at the end of the book. This is what you're going to hear a lot from people. People seem to either love the twist or hate the twist. I loved it, and I love what the twist means for what this book is doing thematically. And I've talked to the author in person after I had read it, actually, and like what I thought when I wrote my review she was doing is in fact what she was trying to do. And I can't tell you what it is without being super spoilery, but if you're interested, or if you've already read the book and you want to hear my thoughts on it, I do have a spoiler section in my Goodreads review, and my Goodreads is always linked down below. But I absolutely love this. I can't talk too much about it, but it really worked for me. It does get very dark. There's definitely horror elements to it. Yeah, I was a fan, and I love the cover. I mean, it's amazing, right? And it's her debut. The next book is kind of a dark YA fantasy romance, and I think this is also one of the most underappreciated books this year. It is Beyond the Black Door by A.M. Strickland. I adored this book, and it's another one that probably isn't going to work out so well for everyone, but I really, really loved it. Like I said, it is a pretty dark fantasy romance with a main character who is asexual biromantic, and it's so good. So good. And I think a lot of people were a little bit confused by this initially because they were like, oh, well, she's asexual, how can it be a romance? And I think this book does a really great job of sort of laying out the difference between being asexual and being aromantic, and that those are two very, very different things. That even though the main character might not be interested in sex, that doesn't mean that she isn't interested in romance. In some ways, this also kind of explores toxic romance and toxic relationships, and in a way that I think I would have found really meaningful and comforting as a young person who sometimes developed feelings for people who weren't necessarily good for me. And I think this does a good job of showing that while you can't necessarily control who you fall in love with, you can control what you choose to do about it. And I think that that is such a powerful message, especially for a young adult audience. But this is also just such a page turner. I couldn't put it down and loved every minute of it. It's about a young woman who has inherited this ability from her mother to be a soul walker, which means if they sleep in close proximity to someone else who is sleeping, they can enter into their souls and sort of suss out secrets. Her mother makes use of this ability by being a sex worker and getting secrets to sell that way, but Kamai is not interested in sex and kind of has to try to find her own path of how she's going to use this ability. The other piece of this, though, is that whenever Kamai is sleeping, there is this mysterious black door that follows her around wherever she goes in different people's souls, and her mother tells her, never open the black door, never open it. And so, of course, years go by, and eventually Kamai decides to open the black door. And so part of the book is what is, in fact, beyond the black door and what happens when she opens it. So yeah, really, really fantastic, underappreciated. I just loved it so, so much. Definitely had to put this on my favorites list. So moving on to my final favorite of 2019, this will come as no surprise to a lot of people who've been following me for a while. I do have a standalone review video up for this book. I love it. I pushed it really hard. A lot of people picked it up because of me, and it's another one that I think was like underappreciated and so, so good. This is The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. I absolutely adored this. This is kind of a mix of sci-fi and mystery, and it is such a page turner. It's set in a futuristic theme park that's sort of like Disneyland on steroids, with these android princesses. They don't call them princesses, they call them something else, but basically android Disney princesses who interact with guests and are there to make their dreams come true. And it's a dual timeline perspective that follows one of these android princesses. And in the future timeline, she is on trial for murder. And so some of the question is, did she commit this murder? And if she did, can she be convicted for it? Because she's an AI. And this gets a lot into questions of what it really means to be human, but also like gender and beauty standards and sexual abuse and environmentalism and lots of different things. I just think this book is so smart and so well done. It's really fun, but also very thematically rich. Again, you could see my whole long review on it, but I love it. I have been pushing this book on people all year, and for the most part, everybody seems to like it, even if it's not a new all-time favorite for it. I don't think I've seen anybody I recommended it to dislike it, which is pretty awesome. So there you have it. Those are my 12 favorite books that I read in 2019. I am really happy with this list. There's some awesome, amazing ones, and as you can see, my favorites shelf is now cleared off and ready for a new batch in 2020, which is wild that we are so close to that. Oh my gosh. I do have one other little thing I want to insert in this video. If you don't care about stats, feel free to click off. I'm done talking about specific books. But for those of you who are sort of publishing stats nerds like me, I also thought it was kind of interesting to take a look at the publishers who put out the books that made this list for me. Personally, I wasn't surprised to see that the biggest group of these came from Macmillan. I tend to really love Macmillan as a publisher, and 5 of the books that made this list are from Macmillan. 2 of them are from Tor, 2 of them by Imprint, and 1 by Henry Holt. Then I had 3 books from Penguin, 1 by Doubleday, 1 by Berkeley Romance, and 1 from One World Books. I also had 3 from Hachette. 1 of them was from Orbit, 1 of them was from Little Brown, and 1 of them was from Nation Books. And then lastly, I actually have an indie publisher on this list. Pegasus Books is the one to publish the English edition of The Court Dancer, and so that's actually an indie press, which is kind of cool. So I just thought that was interesting and would throw this in there for those of you who keep track of that kind of stuff. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on any of the books that I talked about in this video. And for your question of the day, tell me about one of your favorite books of the year. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.